Hello, welcome to the Data and Analytics for Nonprofits 101 webinar. We're so grateful that you're able to join us today. We have planned for you about an hour of really informative information on how you can learn about data and how to use it to best support your nonprofit. Now, a few notes before we get started. We welcome your questions. Please, if you have questions about any of the content that's presented today, or if we are presenting and you have additional questions about some data that's not presented on the slide, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A chat box. It'll be important for us to be able to see your questions so that we can respond. We will take time at the end of the session today to make sure that we address your questions. In the event that we're not able to address your question during this session, we will be able to follow up with you afterwards, but please take your time to put your questions in the Q&A box so we can address your questions at the end of this session. So let's get started. So we're Sivis. What is Sivis? Sivis is a software as a service and a consultancy that focuses on making sure that organizations across the spectrum of nonprofits, as well as commercial entities and others, have access to their data and can use that data to make really informed decisions. We help our clients understand their data journey and how to really use their data teams efficiently, but really importantly, also help them create dependable and reliable reporting. We've worked with a number of clients across the nonprofit spectrum, from the Bail Project, where we help them understand how to best use their data to support folks that were jailed and how to make sure that they're getting the support that they need to combat being in jail. And then we also work with the Human Rights Campaign to help them better understand their data, as well as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and others. We are using data for good. And so we're happy that you're able to join us here today. So I'm Patrice Brown. I'm currently the Chief of Staff at Sivis. Been with Sivis for almost 2 years now. I started out as the Managing Director of our nonprofit team. But what I brought to Sivis, and one of the reasons I wanted to join, is I've worked in nonprofits for over 15 years and have had experience really wanting to use data, but not having access to it in the right way. And also understanding that I needed to harness the data so that my programs and my advocacy could be more impactful. So I'm happy to be here at Sivis and help bring that forward. A little bit about me: I have a serious sweet tooth and love anything with hazelnuts. But let me tell you about the team that's going to be presenting today. We have Anna Berman, who currently serves as one of our applied data scientists. Anna has been working on the team to really help folks understand the intersection of analytics and technology within the nonprofit sector. A little fun fact about Anna is she's been able to tap dance on Broadway. Not many folks can say that. So we're very happy to have Anna here today. We also have Maeve Ward, who recently joined the Sivis team after spending 20 years within the research and insights sector and understanding how to use research and insights to be more effective within programs. I have yet to hear this, but apparently Maeve can also recite the alphabet in dinosaur. So maybe we'll hear that later today. And then also joining us, we have Ben Kirshner, who leads our applied data science team with a focus on nonprofit. He really has been able to put the ETL pipeline and couple that with data warehousing to help our clients better understand their data and be more prescriptive in how they move forward. A fun fact about Ben is every holiday he works within a bakery, and I hear that his croissant making skills are really exceptional. So with that, we are going to turn it over to Anna, who will lead us off with a little bit about data analytics.
Thanks, Patrice. Hi, I'm Anna. Again, I'm an applied data scientist here at Sivis. And I want to start us off by just talking about the basics. What is data analytics? Next slide. Chances are you've heard of it in the office, maybe on the news, maybe in a podcast, maybe it's something you think you should already know something about. But the thing is, if you are at all confused, I'm not surprised. Data analytics includes a really wide variety of concepts and methods, and it's really easy to get lost in the buzzwords and the technicalities of everything. So today, we'll just be briefly touching on some of those really common types of data analytics so you can start to get comfortable with the ideas and hopefully start thinking about how a data analytics program could benefit your organization. So, with all that said, what is data analytics? It is the process of cleaning, organizing, transforming, and learning from your data with the ultimate goal of discovering useful information and informing decisions. So in other words, data analytics helps organizations make sense of their data. Next slide. So I know that all sounds fine and good, but I'm sure there are some of you out there saying, okay, well, if that's data analytics, then what's data science? Or how is that any different than business intelligence? And those are all very fair questions. The lines here are definitely a bit blurred. Most often I see data science being more focused on predictive applications, and it's traditionally more reliant on more robust programming languages like Python or R to get the jobs done. On the other hand, data analytics and business intelligence, those terms can often be used interchangeably, and the focus is more on identifying trends with historical data, maybe visualizing data, and it's often more reliant on SQL programming. So today, we'll just be mostly focusing on the data analytics side of things and just briefly dipping our toes into the data science side of the house. So I know these are all very high level definitions, but the truth is a strong data analytics program can accomplish a really broad range of goals. Some common goals of analytics programs that I've seen are increasing understanding of current supporters, maybe better targeting new potential supporters, growing donations, encouraging additional actions, or just getting more out of existing budgets. All of these goals can be accomplished with data analytics. Overall, what I hope that you can take away from all this is that your data is a huge asset. I see so many nonprofit organizations just sit on this great underutilized asset just primarily because they don't know what's possible. So just starting to get a sense of what is possible is a huge step in the right direction towards getting started with data. I also hope that you can take away from this that strong data analytics doesn't happen overnight. There are many stepping stones in the process, but there are also real benefits to be had at each step along the way. So, speaking of steps, the very first step towards any data analytics project is data organization. Before you can really use your data, you first need to take stock of the data you already have and organize it into a coherent system. Data organization is the practice of categorizing and storing data to make it more usable. Next slide. Data organization can mean a lot of different things. It can mean consolidation of multiple data tables. This is important because if something gets updated along the way, you don't want to have to go making changes in all its related places. You want one single source of truth that you can trust. It can also mean removal of duplicate records. Again, you don't want to be double or triple counting anybody along the way. It can also mean standardizing data formats so that you can make comparisons across tables and across time seamlessly. And importantly, it also means documentation of data systems and processes. Documentation is an often overlooked step to data organization, but it is definitely crucial for maintaining sustainable data standards along the way. An example of the power of organization can be seen in a project that Sivis did with the League of Conservation Voters, which is a US environmental advocacy group. The challenge that they were facing was a really common challenge. They essentially started storing their data across multiple different systems. And because of this, they didn't really have a centralized location for their data. And this is the type of issue that can start small, but it can get out of hand really quickly. So eventually this led to unclear data structures with redundant information stored across multiple locations. And overall, data processes and workflows were redundant and inefficient. So the solution here was to organize their existing data and processes into one centralized location, and in this case, a data warehouse. Essentially, we were doing a big declutter in organization. We consolidated data tables with redundant information. We migrated data into more logical structures. We streamlined data pipelines and standardized data formats. And at the end of the day, we removed any data or workflows left over. The benefits of this were that LCV was able to cut down on wasted expenses contacting people because they now had more standardized addresses and fewer duplicate records. They also had more efficient processes with their data. They used to have workflows that would take upwards of 10 hours to run, and now these workflows were running on only maybe 2 to 3 hours. They also had more stable and flexible systems that were able to save time and resources when any new data changes occurred. And they also just had an overall increased understanding of the data that already existed, which just increased efficiency across the organization. So in my experience, I know that's a lot, but organization is really the building blocks for any other data project. But once you have data organization, the next step that follows is often data reporting. So data reporting is the process of collecting and formatting raw data and translating that into a digestible format. So essentially, data reporting takes your raw data and turns it into something that others, and not just data analysts, but everybody can understand. Reporting can take many different forms. I've often seen reports that have engaging visuals that make understanding the data simple. I've seen reports that involve a lot of key metrics-driven statistics that are informing strategy. And oftentimes reporting takes an interactive or dynamic form. If you've ever interacted with a Tableau dashboard or maybe something in Power BI, these are also falling under the umbrella of reporting. An example of the impact of good reporting is a project that Sivis did with an international environmental organization. So their challenge was they also had non-standardized data living across many different systems, but their main challenge was a very manual and time-intensive reporting process. So the solution here was to, again, unify these disparate data sets into one centralized location, but then go that extra step in transforming that data to create reporting metrics that were automatically piped into these standardized reports. So as you can see here, the first step of this process is really similar to the last project we talked about because it's all about data organization. Because again, that's really the building blocks for anything else. But for this organization, we wanted to take it that one step further and funnel that good data into a workflow that automatically creates these really beautiful reports. So specifically, we brought each office's raw fundraising, petition, and email data into one centralized location. And then we're able to funnel reporting metrics into specific fundraising, petition, and email reports that were automatically updated and housed in that same centralized location, in this case, Sivis platform. The benefits of this were that there was increased visibility across the organization because they now had these standardized reports. They were able to be accessed worldwide. And they also had some really huge time savings because they didn't have to deal with any of this manual reporting anymore. So that's reporting in a nutshell. And all that said, reporting shows different views of records that you currently have. But what if you want to know about a situation that you haven't already encountered in your organization? That is where predictive modeling comes in. So predictive modeling, also known as predictive analytics, is a statistical process that predicts future outcomes by analyzing patterns in historical data. So in other words, you're using your information that you currently have to make educated predictions about new situations. Like I said before, this really crosses into the threshold of data science, but I do think it's important to know in case it's something that you'd like to eventually work towards. There are many different ways to use predictive modeling, but I've commonly seen it used in acquisition. So for example, using characteristics about your current donor base to identify new donor targets. But predictive modeling can also be used to predict a number of different actions, such as maybe supporting an issue, becoming a monthly sustaining member, or voting. But overall, developing predictive models on your data can allow your organization to make forward-looking predictions. An example of a predictive modeling project is one that we did with Lyric Opera of Chicago, which is a leading opera house in the US. Their challenge was that they wanted to increase ticket purchases, but the catch was they had a really limited knowledge of their current audience. So at a high level, the solution here was to use predictive modeling to identify prospective ticket buyers that look similar to their current ticket buyers. But given that there was this limited knowledge of their current audience, the first step here was to augment their list of current ticket buyers with Sivis's database of over 220 plus million Americans. By giving Lyric this new information about their own buyers, we were able to uncover a clear picture of what a typical audience member truly looks like for them. Once we had that additional information, we were able to develop a predictive model. With this model, we were able to say what individual characteristics were good indicators of being a Lyric ticket buyer. Even better, we were able to then use that model to find new prospective buyers. So essentially, we were able to say, okay, we know the characteristics that are good indicators of being a current buyer. Who else in the area has those characteristics? They're probably also going to be good targets for Lyric. So with this information, Lyric was able to identify the best prospective buyers and really target their campaigns to those people. In the end, the prospects identified with this model purchased tickets at 3.5 times the rate of prospects sourced through their old methods, meaning that this model was really great at identifying solid prospective buyers for Lyric. So I know that's a lot of information that I just threw at you, and I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, that's a lot and I need to know how to get started. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Maeve.
The first thing I'm going to do is tell you how to unmute yourself on a webinar like this. But now that I've figured it out, I'm going to talk with you about what you need to get started in data analytics. So we know from Anna that data analytics helps make sense of data. And we know that data analytics encompasses data organization, data reporting, and data modeling. So now we're ready to actually talk about data itself. There are 3 conditions that you need in place in order to be successful in data analytics. The first one is data, which is what I'm going to tell you about. The other 2 are a culture that values evidence over anecdote, and then the right people and tools. Ben, who will follow me, will tell you more about those 2. Okay, so you need data. There isn't much that data analytics can do for you without data. The good news is you probably already have more data than you think. It's important to keep in mind that a clean data set combined with simple analytical methods are more likely to yield great results than a messy data set and complex statistical methods. In other words, garbage in and garbage out. Having data and having useful data are dramatically different things. So what is considered useful data? There are many factors, but useful data is accessible, clean, regularly updated, and connected across different systems. An example would be a data set that is updated every day with a unique identifier for each individual in the system, and that can allow donation data to be easily joined to engagement data. So there's also 3 types of data. 3 is my favorite number. There are 3 basic flavors of ice cream. You have chocolate, you have vanilla, and you have strawberry. There are also 3 flavors of data: first-party data, second-party data, and third-party data. We're going to start with first-party data. What you're seeing here is The First Wives Club, which for those of you born recently is a really great movie. Three wronged wives work together to make sure everyone realizes that first wives are actually the best wives. And likewise, first-party data is often the most valuable data because it's collected from people you already interact with in some way. First party refers to the party that collected the data firsthand. In this case, that's you. First-party data can be website views, it can be social media activity, it can be donations, enrollment, survey responses, or even just basic contact information. You can use this data to learn more about your audience and look for patterns in their characteristics. You can also, for now at least, use first-party data for retargeting online. Have you ever looked at a product online like, oh, I don't know, a 65-inch frame TV that you definitely don't need, but is on sale at Best Buy? And then you decide not to buy it, but you continue to see ads pop up for it as you're scrolling through Instagram. That's an example of first-party retargeting. We can go to the next slide. After the party is the after party, and after first-party data, we get to second-party data. Second-party data is also highly valued, in part because it's often free. It's called second-party data because you're using it secondhand. Second-party data is particularly useful for nonprofit organizations working toward common goals. So, for example, a coalition of organizations all working to end childhood hunger might pool the data they have from donors to get a clearer picture of who is giving or why. Or a group of universities might pool anonymized student data to better understand when and why students transfer from one school to another. Another example is a funder who might pool data from several grantees to get a better look at whether a new program is making an impact. If you've ever made a donation to an organization or a political campaign and suddenly received a flood of solicitations from similar groups, that's second-party data at work. Which then brings us to third-party data. Third-party data is data without a direct link to your audience. It's collected by a third party, so an entity without a relationship to your audience or the audience they're collecting the data from. Credit reports are a classic example of this. Company A sends your payment history to credit bureau B. Best Buy gets your credit information from the credit bureau when you decide you really do want to buy that TV. But at that point, neither the credit bureau nor Best Buy has any direct relationship with you. The best third-party data, the most valuable kind, is the kind that enhances your first-party data. It can add demographic information, psychographic information, or behavioral data information to what you already know about your donors or your students or your funders or your grantees. So at Sivis, we aggregate data from lots of sources, but we also often conduct surveys as a primary way of collecting third-party data to supplement first-party data. Say you have 1,000 donors on your list. You know that you have 1,000 existing donors, and you've already surveyed them directly, so you know what motivates them and what they have in common. In other words, you have your first-party data well in hand and well understood. You might then decide to conduct a survey of 1,000 random people to determine whether they find a particular message persuasive. You don't yet have a relationship with those people, neither does the party who's collecting your data. That makes that third-party data, but you can put it together with your first-party data to know even more. An example of this is a project I worked on for the Holocaust Museum, the United States Memorial Holocaust Museum. They noticed that many of their current donors were noticing patterns where liberators, so not people who survived the Holocaust, not their families, but people who liberated the camps and their families were starting to give more to the museum. But there weren't enough of them on their donor file to really understand them well enough to target them. So they did a survey on people who they didn't have a relationship with, but who matched the characteristics of the people they did to figure out how to target a donor campaign. Okay, so those are your three kinds of data. And we've been talking about surveys and how you might use surveys to collect first and third person data. I want to spend a couple of minutes on good reasons to conduct a survey, bad reasons to conduct a survey, and then what you might look for in a vendor or a partner for survey research. Good reasons to conduct a survey: to fill gaps in your first party data. So maybe you already know from your data that somebody follows you on Twitter, but you don't know anything about their web browsing. You might also do it to enhance your first party data. So similarly, you know that this person has made a gift to you, but you might also want to know who else they've given to. You might want to know more about a particular audience or a geography that's unique to your audience, to pose questions that are unique to your audience, or also to test messages or mail scientifically. That last one is one of the best reasons to conduct a survey. At Sivis, for example, we use randomized controlled trials to test messages and help our clients in a scientific way understand whether one message is better than another or better than doing nothing at all. So we can go to the next slide, which is when you can skip conducting a survey. In some cases, the data that you might want to collect is already available from another source. I can give you 2 examples here. One is, in a previous life, I had a client who wanted to know how many people lived within a mile of a playground, and they were determined to answer that question by calling people and asking how close their nearest playground was. There's 2 problems with that. Most people off the top of their head can't tell you the distance between their house and a playground with any sort of precision. And the second is that Google has already compiled that data for you. You can just pull it down from Google as opposed to paying to do a survey. Another example is when I was at the Gates Foundation, we wanted to have an understanding of school quality in a particular area. So for a person that I'm talking with, do they live in an area with a good school or a bad school? I could ask people that, but it's highly subjective. And instead, there's an organization called Great Schools that has already done that for me. And I can take the Great Schools data and merge it with my survey data to get to the same end. Second reason or second time you can skip doing a survey is when public polling already answers your questions. Sivis has asked an enormous number of questions about COVID-19 and conducted tens of thousands of interviews about people's behavior and how COVID-19 has affected them. Before you do your own poll on COVID-19, you might want to see what we already know. Likewise, public polling firms like the Pew Research Center and Gallup also have a ton of information already available to you. But let's say you've decided to conduct a survey. So what do you want to look for in a research partner? First is you want to look for social science expertise so that you can avoid response biases and order biases in your question. It is much easier to write a bad questionnaire that gives you garbage answers than it is a good questionnaire that actually delivers helpful answers. You also want to make sure that the responses you're collecting are representative of the audience that you want to talk with. That means we avoid sample bias, we avoid non-response bias, and we avoid a tendency for people to just go through and click the middle boxes. We make sure that people are really paying attention to the surveys that they're taking. We also want to make sure that the analysis and reporting is tailored to the questions that you need answered. Some research partners will deliver you a stack of slides and an Excel spreadsheet, which is great if you are already sophisticated in analytics, but much less helpful if you are new and you aren't sure what the data say. You should be getting memos and access to analysts. And then finally, you want tools to take action based on the findings. You want to make sure that the data lives to see another day and isn't only good for that one purpose. Sivis has tools that help nonprofit organizations translate survey data directly into social media targeting, for example. And we can go to the next slide. So what are we supposed to do now? You've made the investment in survey research. You've decided to do it. You are committed to data analytics at your organization. Here are a couple of things that you can do with survey data merged with data analytics over time. You can establish baselines and track changes over time. You can follow a donor, for example, along their journey. You can measure how long it takes to convert a small dollar donor to a large dollar donor. You can target activation campaigns and your outreach. So with surveys and data analytics, you can precisely target who you want to talk to for a particular campaign or a particular activation, whether it's messaging, whether it's acquisition, or whether it's just awareness. You can also inform your progress and you can measure effectiveness at the same time. When I was at the Gates Foundation, I used surveys to make us smarter about the investments we were making and how we talked about them. And I also used that same survey to measure the effectiveness of the program. So I would talk to a teacher about what they wanted to see in their school. And then I would talk to that teacher about whether what we were delivering through grantees was actually effective and met their needs and their goals. And then finally, tell your funders and your board and your donors what you've done. Again, speaking to my experience at the Gates Foundation, when an organization would come to me and say, we need a little bit more money because we really want to be precise and targeted and be able to tell you about how we're spending your money and the impact that it's making, I was always willing to tack something onto the grant if that's what the ask was. If you can use analytics and you can use surveys to spend your money smarter and to be more precise about the way you translate your impact, that will pay dividends down the line. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Ben, who will tell you about the 2 other enabling conditions you need for data analytics.
Thanks, Maeve, for the survey of types of data, no pun intended. I'm going to take us home and talk about culture, the next thing that you need to get started, and then finally, people and tools. So beyond data, one of the things that you'll need is a culture that prioritizes truth and scientific rigor over reaction, instinct, anecdotal evidence. Without this kind of culture, you might notice that any data-driven initiative can be an uphill battle, but we'll talk a little bit about a data-driven culture. Essentially, a data-driven culture builds on a shared understanding of the right questions to ask, the information needed to make decisions, how to measure success. The best data-driven cultures have organization-wide buy-in for using data to make decisions, and discussions around data take place across the organization. Now, I'm probably not surprising anyone when I say that culture is not transformed overnight. And in fact, culture alone could probably be the subject of a whole other webinar, maybe 2 or 3. But one of the biggest things to remember when we're talking about data-driven culture is the importance of experimentation, iteration, and taking incremental steps, learning from your efforts. In this highly scientific chart, becoming data-driven is a journey that probably looks a lot more like that red squiggly line, even if your goal and your ambition is that blue line. With that in mind, I'd like to share a few pointers on how to build data-driven culture. One of the most important things to keep in mind is that data-driven culture is built on data literacy. Well, what is data literacy? Data literacy, simply put, is essentially people in your organization's ability to understand, argue, and communicate with data. This does not mean that everyone is a data expert or a data scientist, but it does mean that people have a general